They said she was damaged goods. They said she wasn't worth the rope to hang her. Standing on that auction block in the blistering Montana sun, with a burlap sack tied over her head, she looked like nothing more than a discarded piece of trash. The town laughed. The rich ranchers sneered. But Samuel Holt, a cowboy with nothing but dust in his pockets and $1 to his name, saw something else. He paid that single dollar, not for a wife, but out of pity. He didn't know that the moment he lifted that sack, he wasn't just saving a woman, he was uncovering a secret that would threaten to burn the entire territory to the ground. This is the true story of how a $1 bet changed history. The year was 1887, and the Montana Territory was unforgiving. If the winter didn't kill you, the loneliness would. Samuel Holt stood at the back of the crowd, his boots caked in the gray mud of the street. He was 28 years old, but looked 40. The sun had etched deep lines around his eyes, and his hands were rough as bark, scarred from years of mending fences on land he didn't own. He was a drifter, currently working for the Double Bar Ranch, earning barely enough to keep his horse, Rusty, fed and his own belly from aching too loud. Today was market day in Blackwater Creek, but the main event wasn't cattle. It was the debtor's disposition, a cruel, legal euphemism for selling off the indentured contracts of those who couldn't pay their way in the New World. It was a practice frowned upon in the cities back east. But out here, where the law was just a suggestion made by men with the biggest guns, it was common entertainment. Next up, bellowed Silas Blackwood, the auctioneer. Blackwood was a man who sweated grease. He stood on the wooden platform, wiping his neck with a stained handkerchief. We got a peculiar lot here, folks. A real mystery. Two rough-looking handlers dragged a figure onto the stage. The crowd murmured. It was a woman, small and frail-looking, wearing a dress that had once been fine blue silk but was now tattered and gray with grime. But what drew the eyes and the jeers was the burlap grain sack tied over her head. It was cinched loosely around her neck with rough twine. "She don't talk much," Blackwood sneered, tapping his cane against the woman's shoulder. She flinched, a small, sharp movement that made Samuel's stomach turn. "And we keep the sack on, well, let's just say she ain't a prize for the eyes. Got a face like a kicked mule, or so I'm told, but she's got strong hands and can scrub a floor. Do I hear $5? Laughter rippled through the crowd. Men nudged each other, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. $5 for a pig in a poke? Shouted Jedediah Sterling, the wealthiest rancher in the valley. Sterling was a cruel man who treated his horses better than his workers. "I wouldn't pay 5 cents for a woman I can't see." "Take the sack off, Blackwood." "Can't do that, Mr. Sterling." Blackwood grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Judge Thaddeus Moore's orders. She's sold as is. The sack stays on till the money changes hands. It's part of her. Punishment for unpaid debts." The crowd quieted. Judge Moore was not a man to cross. If he wanted her humiliated, she stayed humiliated. $1. Blackwood dropped the price, desperate. $1 for a year of labor. Who'll take her? Silence stretched out. A fly buzzed near Samuel's ear. He looked at the woman. She was trembling. Not the trembling of fear, but the vibration of a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. She stood straight, despite the sack, despite the jeers. There was a dignity in her posture that didn't match the situation. Samuel fingered the single silver dollar in his pocket. It was his pay for the week. It was meant for whiskey and a hot bath. If he spent it, he was broke, he'd be hungry. And he'd be saddled with a woman who, by all accounts, was hideous and mute. But Samuel remembered his mother. He remembered how she died alone in a cold cabin because no one would help her. "I'll take her," Samuel said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the murmurs. The crowd turned. Sterling turned, his eyes narrowing as he looked Samuel up and down. "The drift hand?" Sterling laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Samuel, you fool. You gonna hitch her to a plow? I said I'll take her." Samuel repeated, stepping forward. He didn't look at Sterling. He walked up to the platform. took the silver dollar from his pocket, and slammed it onto the lectern. $1. She's mine. Blackwood snatched the coin before Samuel could change his mind. Sold. To the man with more heart than sense. Get her out of here, Holt. She's spooking the horses. Samuel didn't wait. He stepped up, took the woman's elbow gently, and guided her down the steps. She stiffened at his touch but didn't pull away. Come on, he whispered, his voice rough. Let's get you out of this, son. As they walked through the parting crowd, Samuel felt the eyes of the town on them. He felt the shame of it. He had just bought a human being. He felt dirty, even though he told himself he did it to save her from someone like Sterling. He led her to his buckboard wagon. You can climb up, he said. She paused, one hand gripping the side of the wagon. For a second, Samuel thought she might run. Instead, she hauled herself up with surprising grace. Samuel climbed into the driver's seat and flicked the reins. As the wagon lurched forward, leaving the laughter of Blackwood and Sterling behind, Samuel looked at the woman beside him. The sack was still on her head. The twine looked tight. You can take that off now, Samuel said, keeping his eyes on the road. We're out of town. She didn't move. She sat perfectly still, facing forward, the burlap mask breathing in and out with her. Samuel sighed. Great, he thought. I've bought a crazy woman. They rode in silence for a mile, the only sound the creak of the wheels and the wind in the sagebrush. Then, just as they passed the ridge overlooking the canyon, she spoke. You overpaid. Samuel nearly dropped the reins. The voice didn't match the dress. It didn't match the sack. It didn't match the Wild West. It was low, melodious, and carried the distinct, clipped accent of high society education, perhaps Boston, or even London. It was a voice that commanded tea in a parlor, not one that scrubbed floors in a saloon. Samuel pulled the horses to a stop. He turned to look at her. What did you say? He asked. I said, you overpaid, she repeated. I'm not worth $1, Mr. Holt, and if you knew who I really was, you would have paid $100 just to leave me on that stage. Samuel stared at the burlap sack. The wind rippled the coarse fabric, outlining the shape of a nose and chin, but revealing nothing. Who are you? Samuel asked, his hand drifting instinctively toward the knife on his belt, not to hurt her, but because the unknown always put a cowboy on edge. A problem, she said. A very dangerous problem. I got plenty of problems, lady. One more won't kill me. Samuel reached out. Now take that damn thing off. I ain't driven next to a grain sack. She hesitated, her hands coming up to the twine at her neck. Her fingers were slender, but caked with dirt. She struggled with the knot. It had been tied by the rough hands of the handlers, pulled tight to ensure she couldn't free herself. Let me... Samuel grunted. He leaned over, pulling a small folding knife from his pocket. She flinched as the blade came near her throat. Easy. I'm just cutting the string. With a quick flick, the twine snapped. The sack loosened. Go on, he said. Slowly, she reached up and gripped the top of the sack. She pulled it off. Samuel prepared himself. He prepared himself for the scarring Blackwood had joked about, or a deformity that had made the town pariahs reject her. He expected a face that matched the harshness of her life. What he saw made the air leave his lungs. She wasn't ugly. She was breathtaking. Even beneath the layers of smudge and trail dust, her bone structure was undeniable: high cheekbones, a strong jawline, and eyes of a piercing, startling green that seemed to burn with a mixture of fury and fear. Her hair, matted and tangled, was a deep, rich auburn that caught the afternoon sun like copper wire. But there was something else. A bruise, blooming purple and ugly, marred her left cheekbone, and her lip was split. Someone had hit her. Recently. Samuel stared. Why? He stammered. Why the sack? Why'd they say you were? Hideous. She offered a humorless smile. She took a deep breath of the fresh air, running a hand through her messy hair. Because if the men in that town saw my face, Mr. Holt, there would have been a riot to buy me. and Silas Blackwood was under strict orders to ensure I was sold to the lowest bidder, to someone who would use me for labor, not affection. Orders from who? Samuel asked. You mentioned him yourself. Judge Thaddeus Moore. She spat the name like poison. Samuel's blood ran cold. Judge Moore wasn't just a judge. He was the de facto king of the territory. He owned the water rights, the timber, and half the politicians in the state capital. Crossing him was a death sentence. You know the judge? Samuel asked quietly. She turned those green eyes on him. I'm his wife. Or, I was, until 3 days ago. Samuel felt the world tilt. He had just bought the wife of the most powerful man in Montana for $1. He looked around the empty prairie, suddenly feeling very exposed. His wife? Samuel whispered. Mrs. Moore died of smallpox 2 years back. Everyone knows that. His first wife died, she corrected, her voice sharp. Was, his second. My name is Abigail. Abigail Moore. But please, call me Abby. I haven't heard my own name spoken with kindness in 6 months. If you're his wife, Samuel said, his mind racing, why did he sell you as a debtor? Abigail looked down at her hands. Because I found out what he does in the basement of that courthouse, Mr. Holt. I found the ledgers. I found the names of the families he's swindled, the land deeds he's forged, and the people he's made disappear. She looked up, her eyes hard. He couldn't kill me. I have family back east who would ask questions. So, he decided to break me instead. He stripped me of my name, declared me insane and indebted to the court, and ordered me sold to the poorest, most destitute man in the valley. He wanted me to live in squalor, to be humiliated until I begged for his forgiveness. She paused, looking at Samuel's worn shirt and the rust on his wagon. He thinks you will break me, Mr. Holt. He thinks you are a brute who will beat me and work me to death. Samuel looked at her. He looked at the bruise on her face. A cold, dark anger began to bubble in his chest, a feeling he hadn't felt since the war. He thought wrong, Samuel said. He snapped the reins, and the horses lurched forward. Where we going? Abigail asked, gripping the bench. My place ain't much, Samuel said, staring at the horizon. It's a shack with a leaky roof, but it's far from town. We're going to get you cleaned up. Then you're going to tell me everything about those ledgers. Why? Abigail asked, suspicion clouding her eyes. Why would you help me? You could take me back to him. He'd pay you a fortune. Samuel looked at her, his jaw set. I paid $1 for you, Abigail, he said. That means I'm responsible for you, and my daddy taught me that a man protects what's his. Besides, he touched the brim of his hat. I never did like that, Judge. As the wagon rumbled toward the setting sun, a rider appeared on the ridge behind them. He watched them for a moment through a brass spyglass, then turned his horse and galloped back toward Blackwood's auction house. The twist wasn't just that she was beautiful. It was that Samuel had just declared war on the devil himself. The sun was bleeding into the western horizon by the time they reached Samuel's homestead. To call it a homestead was generous. It was a shack, patched together with scavenged timber and sod, leaning precariously against a rocky outcrop near a dried-up creek bed known as Coyote Creek. Abigail looked at the structure as Samuel reined in the horses. It was smaller than the carriage house on her husband's estate. The wind whistled through gaps in the logs, a lonely, mournful sound. Home, sweet home, Samuel muttered, swinging down from the wagon. He offered a hand to help her down. She took it, her skin cool and soft against his calloused palm. The contact sent a jolt through him that he quickly suppressed. He was her jailer, technically, or her savior. He wasn't sure which yet, but he definitely wasn't her suitor. Inside, the shack smelled of stale wood smoke, burnt Arbuckle's coffee, and loneliness. There was a dirt floor packed hard as stone, a small cast-iron stove in the corner, a rickety table with one chair, and a cot in the corner piled with wool blankets. Abigail stood in the center of the room, clutching her tattered silk dress around her. She looked like a porcelain doll dropped in a mud puddle. It's not Chicago, Samuel said defensively, busying himself with lighting a kerosene lamp. The golden glow pushed back the shadows, making the small space feel slightly less desolate. "No," Abigail whispered, her eyes scanning the meager possessions, a few tin plates, a rifle hanging over the door, a worn Bible on a shelf. "It's honest. That's more than I can say for the mansion I left." Samuel looked at her, surprised by the steel in her voice. He pointed to the cot. "You take the bed. I'll throw a bedroll on the floor by the door." "I couldn't kick you out of your own bed," she protested feebly. "Lady, I paid $1 for the right to make the decisions tonight," Samuel growled, trying to sound tougher than he felt. "Take the damn bed. You look like you're about to fall over." He went outside to tend to the horses, needing the cold night air to clear his head. When he returned, Abigail was sitting on the edge of the cot, shivering. She had tried to wash the grime from her face using water from the bucket by the door, but without soap, it just streaked the dirt. Samuel sighed. He went to the stove and stoked the embers, adding kindling until a small fire crackled. He put a kettle on to boil. "Come here," he said, pulling the chair near the stove. She obeyed silently. In the lamplight, he could see the damage clearly now. The bruise on her cheek was purpling, and her lower lip was swollen. "Who hit you?" Samuel asked, his voice dangerously low. He grabbed a cleanish rag and dipped it in the warming water. "One of Blackwood's men." "When I tried to run before the auction," she winced as Samuel gently dabbed the cut on her lip. He was close to her now. Too close. He could smell the faint scent of lavender beneath the dust and sweat a ghost of her former life. Her green eyes were wide, watching him with a mixture of fear and a strange, dawning trust. "I've dressed wounds on horses worse than this," Samuel said, trying to lighten the mood, but his hands were shaking slightly. He traced the jawline where the bruise was blooming. "Did he ever hit you?" Abigail looked away toward the dark window. Thaddeus didn't need to use his fists. He used words. He used silence. He used isolation. "He made me believe I was crazy for seeing things, the late-night visitors, the bags of money that appeared and disappeared. When I found the ledgers hidden beneath the floorboards of his study, he looked at me like I was a roach he needed to step on." She turned back to Samuel, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. "He told me no one would believe me, that I was a hysterical city girl who couldn't handle the frontier. He said he'd send me to an asylum, or worse, do exactly what he did today, sell me like cattle to break my spirit." Samuel dropped the rag into the bucket. The water turned gray. He felt a murderous rage tighten his chest. He knew men like Moore, men who hid their cruelty behind expensive suits and the rule of law. "He messed up," Samuel said. He stood up and went to the corner, pulling a heavy Navy Colt revolver from a holster hanging on a nail. He checked the cylinder, fully loaded. "How did he mess up?" Abigail asked, watching the gun. Samuel spun the cylinder and snapped it shut. "He assumed that just because a man is poor, he don't have honor. And he assumed that just because a woman is pretty, she ain't got no fight." He placed the heavy gun on the table between them. The metal gleamed in the lamplight. "Get some sleep, Abigail. Tomorrow, you're going to teach me what's in those ledgers, and I'm going to teach you how to use this." The following morning, the reality of their situation hit with the rising sun. The Montana sky was a brilliant, uncaring blue. It was a beautiful day for a manhunt. Samuel knew they were living on borrowed time. Blackwood wasn't stupid. When his spy reported that Samuel hadn't immediately put Abigail to work in the fields or treated her like the livestock she was sold as, word would get back to Judge Moore fast. Breakfast was weak coffee and hardtack biscuits Samuel had scavenged from the chuck wagon at the ranch 3 days prior. Abigail ate without complaint, soaking the rock-hard biscuit in the coffee. "We can't stay here," Samuel said, staring out the single grimy window that faced the trail. "They know where I live." "Where can we go?" Abigail asked. The silk dress was even more tattered today, contrasting bizarrely with the revolver stuck in Samuel's belt. "There's old mining caves up in the Bitterroots, about 20 miles north. My pa used to prospect up there. It's rough country. Hard to track someone over solid rock." Before they could pack the few meager supplies Samuel owned, the sound of galloping hooves echoed up the canyon. Samuel froze. He moved instantly to the wall, grabbing his Winchester rifle. "Get down," he hissed at Abigail. "Under the cot." "Don't make a sound." Abigail scrambled under the small bed, pressing herself into the dirt floor. Samuel peered through a crack in the door planks. 3 riders. They weren't regular ranch hands. They wore long canvas dusters to hide their weapons, and their horses were high-quality mounts, not range ponies. Leading them was a man Samuel recognized by reputation only, Jack Corbett. He was Judge Moore's personal problem solver, a man whose face was half ruined by scar tissue from a bear attack years ago, leaving him with a permanent, ghastly sneer. Corbett didn't arrest people. He erased them. The 3 men pulled up 20 yards from the shack. Corbett sat casually in his saddle, chewing on a toothpick. "Samuel Holt," Corbett called out. His voice was like grinding stones. "Come on out, boy. We just want to talk." Samuel didn't move. He thumbed back the hammer of the Winchester. The click sounded like thunder in the small shack. "I know you're in there, Holt. We saw the smoke from your stove." Corbett spat the toothpick onto the ground. "The judge is awful upset. Seems there's been a misunderstanding with a piece of his property you acquired yesterday." "She was sold legal on the auction block," Samuel shouted back. "I got the receipt." Corbett laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "The law is what Judge Moore says it is today, cowboy. Now, here's the deal. You send the missus out. We take her back home where she belongs. And maybe, just maybe, I don't burn this little rat's nest down with you inside it." Under the cot. Abigail was shaking violently. She grabbed Samuel's ankle, her fingernails digging into his boot leather. He glanced down at her. Her eyes begged him not to give her up. He thought about the dollar in his pocket yesterday. He thought about his mother dying alone because powerful men didn't care about poor folk. "She ain't property, Corbett," Samuel yelled. "And she ain't going back to that bastard." Silence stretched outside. Then Corbett sighed, loud enough to be heard. "Have it your way, son. Boys, light it up." The 2 men behind Corbett pulled torches from their saddlebags and lit them. They didn't bother with guns yet. They were going to smoke them out. "The back window," Samuel snapped, holstering the rifle and grabbing the Colt off the table. He shoved it into Abigail's shaking hands. "It's small, but you can fit. Go. Run for the creek bed and keep your head down. Head north. I'm not leaving you," she argued, gripping the heavy gun awkwardly. "I'll hold them off. If you stay, we both die. Go." One of the riders threw his torch. It landed on the dry thatched roof of the shack. In seconds, the dry wood caught. Smoke began to curl downwards from the ceiling. Samuel didn't wait. He kicked open the front door and raised his Winchester. He fired 3 shots in rapid succession. The first shot took the hat off one of the torchbearers. The second hit the dirt near Corbett's horse, making it rear violently. The third went wild as Samuel dove behind the water trough. Return fire erupted. Bullets slammed into the wood of the shack and pinged off the metal trough. The air filled with the smell of black powder and burning wood. "Flank him," Corbett roared, bringing his own horse under control and pulling a sawed-off shotgun from a scabbard. The heat from the burning shack was already intense at Samuel's back. He peeked around the trough. One rider was swinging wide to the left, trying to get a clear shot. Samuel took a deep breath, stood up, fired, and ducked back down. A cry of pain told him he'd connected. The rider fell from his saddle, clutching his shoulder, but that left Corbett and the other man, and the shack was now a roaring bonfire. Samuel knew he was outgunned and outflanked. He was a ranch hand, not a gunfighter. He prepared to make a run for the tree line, knowing he probably wouldn't make it across the open ground. Just as Corbett leveled his shotgun at the trough, a shot rang out from behind the shack, a distinct, loud boom of a heavy-caliber revolver. The second rider, the one who was about to flank Samuel on the right, jerked in his saddle and slumped forward, dead before he hit the ground. Corbett spun his horse around, confused by the new direction of fire. Samuel looked back. Standing near the edge of the burning shack, choked by smoke, was Abigail. She held the Navy Colt with both hands, the barrel smoking, Her face was streaked with soot and tears, but her eyes were fierce. She had come back. She had used the one bullet he'd taught her how to load. "Run, damn you, run!" Samuel screamed at her, breaking from cover and sprinting toward the horses the dead man had left behind. Corbett roared in fury, swinging his shotgun toward Abigail. Samuel fired his rifle from the hip as he ran, not aiming to hit, just to suppress. Corbett flinched, the shotgun blast tearing up the dirt feet away from Abigail. Samuel reached the horses. He grabbed the reins of the two best mounts, vaulted onto one, and rode toward Abigail. He leaned down, extending his arm. "Jump!" She threw the empty gun aside and reached for him. He caught her forearm, his muscles screaming as he swung her up behind him. They didn't look back. They galloped toward the northern hills, leaving behind a burning shack, 2 dead men, and a furious enforcer who would never stop hunting them. The war had begun. The Bitterroot Mountains were not a place for the weak, and they certainly weren't a place for a woman in a torn silk dress and a cowboy with a target on his back. 3 days had passed since the shootout at the shack. 3 days of riding hard through scrub brush and pine, pushing the stolen horses until their flanks lathered with sweat, then walking them to keep them from collapsing. Samuel knew these hills better than he knew the back of his own hand, but the winter chill was setting in early. The wind carried the scent of snow, a metallic tang that promised hardship. They made camp in a shallow cave hidden behind a screen of thick hemlock trees, halfway up a ridge known as Dead Horse Pass. It was a defensible position, but it was cold. Bone-chillingly cold. Samuel built a small fire, keeping it deep in the cave so the light wouldn't carry. He watched Abigail as the flames flickered to life. She was huddled in his spare duster coat, which swallowed her small frame. She hadn't spoken much since the burning shack, since she pulled the trigger. "Here," Samuel said, handing her a tin cup of melted snow water he'd boiled with some pine needles for vitamin C. "Drink. It ain't tea, but it'll warm you." Abigail took the cup with trembling hands. She stared into the dark liquid. "I killed him." "Samuel." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact that seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. Samuel sat across from her, cleaning his Winchester. He didn't look up. "You saved my life, Abby. There's a difference, is there?" She looked up, her green eyes haunted in the firelight. "I watched him fall. I watched the light go out of his eyes. I was a society wife, Samuel. I planned dinner parties. I embroidered pillowcases. I don't kill men." Samuel set the rifle down. He moved closer to her, the fire popping between them. "You did what you had to do. Out here, the law ain't written in books. It's written in survival. That man, he would have put a bullet in my back and dragged you off to a hell worse than dying. You didn't choose it. The judge chose it for you." At the mention of her husband, Abigail's expression hardened. The grief was replaced by a cold, sharp anger. "The ledgers," she whispered. Samuel frowned. "What about 'em? We ain't got 'em. They burned in the house, or are back in his safe." "No." Abigail tapped her temple. "I have a photographic memory, Samuel. My father was an actuary in Boston. He taught me how to remember numbers, dates, names. I didn't just read the ledgers. I memorized them." She leaned forward, the firelight dancing on her face. "Thaddeus isn't just stealing land. He's clearing a path. The Northern Pacific Railroad is looking for a new spur route through the valley. They haven't announced it yet, but Thaddeus knows. He's been using the debtor laws to seize every property along the proposed line." Samuel listened, his brow furrowing. "That's why he wanted the Rolling K Ranch and the Miller place." "Yes," Abigail nodded. "He buys the debt for pennies, evicts the owners or throws them in jail, and then holds the deed. When the railroad comes through next spring, he'll sell the land back to the government for millions. He's going to own the entire territory." "Millions," Samuel whistled low. "That's enough money to buy a Senate seat." "Exactly. But there was one entry, Samuel, one that I didn't understand until I met you." She paused, searching his face. "There was a deed transfer from 7 years ago, a property seized for failure to pay grazing taxes. The owner was listed as a Josiah Holt, Samuel went still. The air in the cave seemed to drop 10 degrees. That was my pa. The ledger noted that the owner was removed due to resistance. Abigail said softly, "Thaddeus didn't just take your father's land, Samuel. He authorized the raid that killed him." Samuel stood up abruptly. He walked to the mouth of the cave, staring out into the pitch-black darkness of the forest. His breath came in ragged clouds. For 7 years, Samuel had believed his father died in a botched cattle-rustling incident, a random act of violence in a violent land. He had carried the guilt that he wasn't there to stop it. But it wasn't random. It was business. It was a line item in a ledger book. The judge hadn't just bought his wife for $1. He had paid for Samuel's misery with blood money years ago. Samuel felt a hand on his shoulder. Abigail was standing beside him. She didn't say anything. She just leaned her forehead against his arm. "He killed him," Samuel rasped, his voice breaking. "He killed my pa for a train track. We're going to stop him," Abigail said. Her voice wasn't shaking anymore. It was steel. "We're going to make him pay for every acre, Samuel. For your father, for me, for that $1. Samuel turned to look at her. In the moonlight, the bruise on her cheek was fading, but the fire in her eyes was brighter than ever. He realized then that he hadn't just bought a wife. He had found a partner. "How?" Samuel asked. "We're 2 people against an army. Corbett is still out there. And now that we killed one of his men, he won't stop until we're dead. We need to get to Helena," Abigail said. "To the federal marshal. If I can testify, if I can recite the dates and the fraudulent signatures, they can open an investigation. But we need proof. We need one of the original forged deeds." Samuel nodded slowly. "I know where one is. My pa's deed. I buried it in a tin box under the old oak tree on our property. The judge's men burned the house, but they never dug up the yard. If we can get that deed, and if you can match it to the ledger entry in your head, then we have him," Abigail finished. "But the whole place is right back near town," Samuel warned. "Right in the belly of the beast. Then we go back," Abigail said. She reached up and took his rough hand in hers. "We go back, and we burn his world down." Samuel squeezed her hand. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a lonely drifter. He felt like a man with a purpose. "Get some sleep, Abby. We ride at dawn." As they settled back onto the hard stone floor, huddled together for warmth, the first flakes of snow began to drift into the cave entrance. The winter was here, and so was the reckoning. The journey back toward Blackwater Creek was harder than the escape. The snow had turned the trails into treacherous slides of mud and ice. They had to move slow, sticking to the timberline to avoid the patrols that were surely scouring the valley. They were running low on food. The hardtack was gone. Samuel managed to shoot a rabbit on the second day, and they shared the meager meat over a smokeless fire, tearing at it with hungry desperation. By the 4th day, they reached the outskirts of the valley. From a high vantage point, they could see the town of Blackwater Creek in the distance. It looked peaceful, the chimneys smoking, the church bell ringing. But Samuel knew it was a nest of vipers. "We need supplies before we go to the old farm," Samuel said, watching the town through his monocular. "And we need fresh horses. These 2 are spent. We can't go into town," Abigail whispered. "Your face is known. And mine. Well, I'm the woman with the sack on her head. I'm hard to miss." "I know a place," Samuel said. "About 5 miles east. There's a trading post run by an old trapper named Silas. He owes me a favor. He hates the judge almost as much as I do." They rode east, the horses stumbling with fatigue. The trading post was a ramshackle log cabin built into the side of a hill, surrounded by piles of curing furs, beaver, fox, and wolf. The smell was overpowering, a mix of musk and rot, but to Samuel, it smelled like safety. Samuel dismounted and signaled for Abigail to stay back. He approached the door, his hand on his revolver. "Silas," he called out. "It's Samuel Holt." The door creaked open. A grizzled old man with a beard like a bird's nest stepped out. He squinted against the snow glare, holding a double-barreled shotgun loosely in one arm. "Samuel?" Silas lowered the gun. Lord Almighty. Boy, I heard you were dead. Heard Corbett hung you up by your toes. Not yet, Samuel said, stepping forward. We need help, Silas. Food and horses. Silas looked past him to where Abigail sat on the horse, wrapped in the duster. That the woman? The one the judge is offering the reward for? Samuel stiffened. What reward? $1,000, Samuel. Dead or alive. For the kidnapper, Samuel Holt. And $500 for the safe return of Mrs. Moore. Silas spit tobacco juice into the snow. That's a lot of money. Samuel's hand tightened on his gun. You gonna try and collect, Silas? Silas looked at Samuel, then at the exhausted woman. He let out a long sigh and broke the shotgun open, showing it was unloaded. I ain't no bounty hunter, son, and I don't take blood money from Thaddeus Moore. Come on inside. I got stew on. Samuel breathed a sigh of relief. He waved Abigail over. Inside, the cabin was warm and cluttered. Silas served them bowls of venison stew that tasted like heaven. Abigail ate with a ferocity that surprised even her. You're in deep, Samuel, Silas said, pouring them mugs of strong coffee. Corbett has men watching every road. They say the judge has called in favors from the governor. He's got the U.S. Marshals looking for you now, claiming you're a dangerous outlaw who kidnapped his mentally ill wife. He's lying, Abigail said, her voice raspy. He's the criminal. Doesn't matter what the truth is, ma'am, Silas said gently. Matters who tells the story first, and the judge has the telegraph lines. We just need to get to my old place, Samuel said. Tonight, then we're gone. Silas nodded slowly. I can give you 2 fresh horses. Mules, actually. More sure-footed in this snow. And some dried beef. He paused, looking at the window. But you should know. Corbett was here yesterday, asking about you. Samuel froze, his spoon halfway to his mouth. What did you tell him? Told him I hadn't seen you. Told him you probably headed for Canada. Silas stood up and walked to the back of the room. But he left something. Silas reached into a crate and pulled out a small, wooden box. He placed it on the table. He said if you ever showed up, I was to give you this. Samuel stared at the box. It was a cigar box, expensive mahogany. The kind the judge smoked. Don't open it, Abigail warned, sensing a trap. Samuel flipped the latch. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet, was a lock of gray hair tied with a blue ribbon. And a note. Samuel picked up the note. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. I know about your sister in Denver, Samuel. Adele. Nice girl. 2 kids. If you aren't back in Blackwater Creek by sundown tomorrow to return my property, Adele and her little ones will suffer a tragic house fire. T.M. Samuel crushed the note in his fist. A roar of pure, primal rage ripped from his throat. He swept the stew bowl off the table, sending it crashing against the wall. He found her, Samuel shouted, pacing the small room like a caged animal. He found Adele. I haven't seen her in 10 years to keep her safe. How did he find her? He has reach, Samuel, Abigail said, her face pale. She stood up and grabbed his arm. He's trying to bait you. If you go back to town, he kills you. And he probably hurts your sister anyway, just to be thorough. I can't take that risk, Samuel yelled at her. That's my sister, and if you die, who saves her? Abigail shouted back, grabbing his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. Think, Samuel. If we surrender, we die, and Adele dies because she's a loose end. The only way to save her is to destroy him. Now, Samuel stared into her green eyes. She was right. He knew she was right. But the fear for his sister was a cold knife in his gut. We have to move, Samuel said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Silas, give us the mules. Wait, Silas said. He looked guilty. He looked at the floor, then at the door. I can't let you leave, Samuel. Samuel turned slowly. Silas was holding the shotgun again, and this time He had snapped it shut. It was loaded. "Silas?" Samuel asked, betrayed. "They have my boy, Samuel," Silas said, tears streaming into his beard. "Corbett took my grandson. Said if you showed up and I let you leave, they'd kill him. I sent a signal when you rode up. The smoke from the chimney. Green wood. They're coming." The room went silent. The only sound was the wind howling outside. "I'm sorry, Samuel," Silas wept, the gun shaking in his hands. "I can't let my boy die for you." Samuel looked at his old friend. He saw the desperation. He understood it. The judge broke everyone, eventually. "I ain't gonna shoot you, Silas," Samuel said softly. "Then put your hands up." Silas choked out. "Please." Samuel slowly raised his hands. Abigail did the same. "They'll be here any minute," Silas said. "Just surrender. Maybe the judge will have mercy." "The judge doesn't know the meaning of the word," Abigail said. Suddenly, the front window shattered. A glass bottle with a burning rag stuffed in the neck sailed into the room and smashed against the back wall where the furs were piled. "Fire!" Silas screamed, turning toward the flames. It wasn't Corbett. It was the judge's men, arriving early. They didn't care about Silas or his grandson. They were just burning the rat out of the hole. "They double-crossed you, Silas," Samuel roared. He tackled the old man, knocking the shotgun away just as the dry furs erupted into a wall of flame. Out the back, Samuel grabbed Abigail's hand. He hauled Silas up by his collar. "Move, old man." They scrambled toward the back door of the cabin. The heat was instantaneous and searing. The cabin, filled with dry timber and animal grease, was a tinderbox. They burst out the back door into the snow just as gunfire erupted from the tree line. "Get down." Samuel threw Abigail into the snow behind the woodpile. Bullets chewed up the logs above their heads. Silas didn't make it. He stood in the doorway, confused and heartbroken, looking at the burning ruins of his life. A rifle round caught him in the chest, and he slumped back into the inferno. "Silas!" Samuel screamed. "He's gone." Abigail pulled at him. "Samuel, we have to run." They were pinned down. The cabin was blazing, illuminating them against the snow. There were at least 5 gunmen in the trees. "The mules are in the lower corral," Samuel panted, checking his revolver. "I'll draw their fire. You run for the animals. No more splitting up," Abigail cried. "Look at me," Samuel shouted over the roar of the fire. "I bought you for $1, remember? Best investment I ever made. Now make it worth it and get the damn mules." Samuel rose up and fired blindly toward the muzzle flashes in the trees. He ran in a zigzag pattern toward the burning cabin, screaming a war cry to draw their attention. Bullets kicked up snow on all around him. He felt a sharp sting graze his ribs, a flesh wound, but it burned like a brand. Abigail didn't argue. She sprinted low toward the corral. She vaulted the fence, untethered the 2 mules, and slapped one hard on the rump to send it galloping toward the woods, creating a distraction. She jumped onto the other one. Samuel was pinned behind a water barrel, the heat from the house blistering his back. He was down to 2 rounds. Suddenly, a mule thundered past him. Abigail reached down, her arm extended. "Samuel!" He holstered his gun and leaped. He grabbed her arm, swinging up behind her as the mule bucked. They rode hard, crashing through the brush, leaving the trail and heading straight down the steep embankment toward the frozen river. Behind them, the trading post was a funeral pyre for an old friend. They had escaped the trap, but they were battered, bleeding, and out of allies. And now, Samuel knew the clock was ticking not just for them, but for his sister. "We get the deed," Samuel whispered into Abigail's hair as they galloped into the night. "Then we kill the Judds. No more running." Abigail reached back and squeezed his hand. Her touch was the only thing anchoring him to the world. "No more running," she agreed. "Now we hunt." The ride back to Blackwater Creek was a funeral procession of 2. Samuel and Abigail, battered and freezing, rode the stolen mules into town just as the church bell tolled 6 times. They had made a detour to the ruins of the Holt farm, digging through the frozen earth beneath the old oak tree, until Abigail's fingers bled, finally unearthing the rusted tin box containing the original deed, the proof that Judge Thaddeus Moore hadn't just taxed the land, but stolen it after murdering Samuel's father. But proof was useless if they were dead. The town square was eerily silent. Judge Moore stood on the courthouse steps, flanked by 3 deputies and the scarred enforcer, Jack Corbett. Kneeling in the mud before them was Adele, Samuel's sister, a rope already looped loosely around her neck. "I knew you'd come," the judge called out, his voice smooth as polished granite. "A pauper always returns for his scraps." Samuel dismounted, his hand hovering near his revolver. He looked at Adele, whose eyes were wide with terror, then at the judge. "I'm here." "Thaddeus, let her go. The deed first." The judge smiled, extending a gloved hand. Abigail stepped forward. She looked small against the backdrop of the massive courthouse, her dress in tatters, the burlap sack long gone. She held the oilcloth packet high. "It's all here. The dates, the forged signatures, the witness testimony of a sheriff who was already dead. Give it to me," Moore hissed, his composure cracking. "Come and get it," Abigail challenged, her voice ringing off the storefronts. Corbett stepped forward, leveling his shotgun. "Don't play games, girl. No games," Abigail said. She locked eyes with the judge. "I mailed a copy to the governor's office in Helena 3 days before the auction. They've been riding south ever since. It was a lie, a desperate, brilliant bluff, but fear flashed in the judge's eyes. In that split second of hesitation, Samuel made his move. "Drop it," Samuel roared, drawing his Colt with lightning speed. Corbett swung his shotgun, but he was too slow. Samuel's bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The shotgun blasted into the dirt, sending the horses into a panic. "Kill them!" the judge screamed, grabbing Adele and using her as a human shield. He pressed a derringer to her temple. "Drop the gun, pauper, or the girl dies." Samuel froze. The deputies raised their rifles. It was over. Then, a sound cut through the chaos. A metallic click. Abigail had circled behind the distraction. She stood 10 feet to the judge's left, the heavy Navy revolver Samuel had given her leveled at her husband's head. Her hands weren't shaking. "Let her go, Thaddeus," Abigail said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "Or I will show you exactly what damaged goods can do. You won't shoot." The judge sneered, though sweat beaded on his forehead. "You're a society wife. You're weak." "I was," Abigail corrected. "Then I met a man who paid his last dollar just to keep me safe. That buys a lot of loyalty." She pulled the hammer back. The judge flinched, shifting his weight. That was enough. Adele bit the judge's hand hard. He howled, pulling the gun away instinctively. Bang! Abigail didn't miss. The shot hit the judge in the thigh, shattering the bone. He collapsed, screaming, the derringer skittering away. Samuel rushed forward, kicking the gun away and pulling Adele into his arms. The deputies, seeing their leader fallen and the U.S. Marshals likely on the way, if they believed the lie, lowered their weapons. Samuel looked at Abigail. She stood over the weeping judge, the smoking gun at her side. She looked like an avenging angel. "It's over," Samuel said, walking to her and gently taking the gun from her hand. Abigail looked up at him, tears finally spilling over. "Did I do it right?" Samuel smiled, wiping a smudge of gunpowder from her cheek. "For $1? I'd say I got the bargain of the century. In the end, there were no millions. The railroad bypassed the town due to the legal scandal. The land became worthless. But Samuel and Abigail didn't care. They rebuilt the cabin on Coyote Creek, not as master and servant, but as partners. History books in Montana still mention the $1 War of 1887. They say it was the only time a man bought a fortune for $1, only to realize the treasure wasn't the land, it was the woman standing on it. And that, my friends, is the incredible true story of Samuel and Abigail Holt. In a time when life was cheap and survival was a daily gamble, one man risked his last dollar on a stranger not to own her, but to save her. They say that love isn't about what you can afford, but what you're willing to sacrifice. Samuel sacrificed his safety, and Abigail sacrificed her past, proving that even the most broken people can heal each other. If this story moved you, or if you think Samuel was the smartest investor in the Wild West, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a saga from the frontier. And tell me in the comments, would you have spent your last dollar to save a stranger? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.